Welcome to the Cycling Performance Podcast, presented by Team EF Coaching, where we explore the intersection between the science of sport and the art of balance, human behavior, and sustainable performance on and off the bike. Hello, Internet monkeys, and welcome to another episode of the Cycling Performance Podcast powered by Team EF Coaching. I am one of the hosts. My name is Nathan Haas, and the co-host...
I'm the co-host, Colby Pearce.
Colby's always a little bit late to that. I feel like Colby runs one or two cadence beats behind everyone else. I always introduce Colby, and then I'm like, say something. Anyway, Colby Pearce. And we have a very, 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 very awesome, in total aura of this guest today, Maddy Nutt. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, it's called a dramatic pause, Nathan.
That's what it is. That's
Yeah.
what it is. I'm just trying to get my words out all the time, Colby. I think
Yes.
maybe I need to learn something from you. Think before you speak. But anyway, Maddy's voice is a little bit husky because two days ago, she just had her beautiful wedding. How was it?
It was the best day of my life, without a doubt. It was wild. It was super wholesome for a few hours and just amazing and everything we wanted. And then it turned into a feral night out. So I think that's exactly what you want from a wedding.
Sounds pretty much like what the doctor ordered to me. I think the only sad thing was that I wasn't there, but
The other sad thing was that at the end of the night, I did like a ridiculous dance move and split my trousers. But that was also very entertaining, and I at that point did not care at all and walked around with literally a split in the bottom of my trousers.
Nice.
That's a 10 out of 10 effort, Maddy.
Yes.
You went all in. I love it. It feels like
Concur.
everything you do in life, you go 10 out of 10.
A few people were like, I've never seen this side of you. And I was like, that's because I always commit to things when I'm going to commit to them. And you just never see me on a night out.
Well, I think, the more you become, entrenched in your professional athletic endeavors, I think naturally the night outs become more infrequent, which
Yeah.
is good and bad. It's all about balance. We have to have fun when we need to. So I'm glad you had a great night at your wedding, and congratulations. Very cool.
Thank you.
So, Maddy, I wanted to jump in and ask you because I think it's one of the more fun stories of coming to cycling that I've heard in a long time. Would you please grace the listeners with as much detail as you would like to, or as little detail? But we like detail here. Detail's great. So please tell us about how Maddy Nutt came to be the cyclist she is today. And maybe we should also just start off by actually explaining to all the listeners actually who you are as a cyclist right now, and then go back.
Okay, shall I explain who I am?
Please.
Okay, so I am a gravel cyclist. I'm based in London, which is not the typical place you'd think for a gravel cyclist. So I don't actually spend that much time here. But yeah, I grew up in London and I've lived here pretty much my entire life. And yeah, I'm a gravel cyclist, and I kind of turned to doing a bit of ultra racing this year as well. I've done 3 ultra races, well, 3 races that I would say are considered ultra races this year. And that's probably enough for a year, I would say. The longest one was 570k, which was Unbound XL. And yeah, I've been really enjoying them this year and mixing it in with normal gravel racing as well.
All right, so what Maddy didn't say is in those ultras, she won the Tracker 560. She was second in Unbound XL, and she won the Iceland... What was the name?
It was called the Abyss, actually, because it's like a bigger gap than the Rift.
Yeah,
It's like Abyss.
so Maddy's not been doing ultras. She's been crushing ultras this year. But also, before ultras, you were also taking on more standard distance and UCI gravel races, and you've won quite a few of those as well, right?
I think I won 2 UCI races. I won one in 2024 and one in 2025, and I've not won one this year. I was like, it'd be really cool to win one every year because you get this like special jersey. But yeah, I won the one in Kenya, Hell's Gate National Park, which was awesome because you literally race amongst zebras. And then last year I won a UCI race in Brazil, which was 40 degrees. It was ridiculous.
So something I used to do when I was training is sometimes I would pretend I had a lion chasing me. And I did that to sort of put like fear into my effort to see just how hard I could go if I was trying to get away from a lion. So did that like help in the race in Africa?
This is actually a good question. To be fair, there were lions in that park. I think the more you're just thinking, I just don't want to see anything. Like, I don't want to see an animal, or I don't want to see an animal that I don't want to, that I shouldn't want to see. Like, a zebra's fine. They're like, like a good animal to see. But yeah, I tried not to think about the lions because it actually was a realistic potential.
But doesn't it mean that if you see a zebra, it probably means that a lion is quite close?
Yeah.
That's the way I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. That's a fair point. I did have to stop a race I did in Kenya once. Not the UCI race, but the migration gravel race. I had to stop for a herd of elephants on one stage. And they're pretty dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't mess with an elephant. There's probably a song written about that somewhere in the world.
But at the time, I didn't care. I was like, let me race. Because I was like winning the stage. So I was like, why are you stopping me? Like, let me keep going. And they're like, no, 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 it's a herd of elephants. You have to stop. And I was like, no, I'm losing so much time. This is ridiculous. And it's only now in retrospect that I'm like, wow, I saw a herd of elephants.
Did the guy say to you, you might lose some time or all the time, Maddie? I suggest
all the time, and then there's no point even thinking about it. Yeah.
Well, all right. So we sort of touched on the brilliant cyclist you are, and chapeau to a pretty great few years of success on the bike. But tell us now, where did it start?
The origin story. I actually only got a bike when I was 20. I did do a little bit of triathlon as a kid, but I didn't cycle between the age of 11 and 20 years old. Um, and when I was 20, I was running just for like my own mental health, just running quite a lot. And then I decided to sign up to a triathlon as like a challenge. So I signed up to a 70.3 Ironman and I survived my way around the bike. I'd only ever ridden 100k once before and I had 6 cafe stops. So it was like a real challenge to ride 90k. And then I kind of fell in love with cycling after that, just because it was something I could do for like a long time. It was really social. I could stop for cake and coffee. And my riding for the first couple of years was a lot of just riding to cafes and like riding with friends, stopping for cake, stopping for coffee. And then when the COVID lockdown hit, I started cycling a lot more, just because it was the only thing I could really do. I was studying at the time and I just had so much time for cycling. I could cycle like 8 hours every day. And I didn't really know what training was. So I would just ride, I assume zone 2. I don't even know if I was riding zone 2, probably zone 1, just like every single day for hours. So I probably put in like a whole COVID lockdown worth of base training. And after COVID, I did some races and I was actually forced to do a gravel race. I did not want to do a gravel race. I had like an ex-girlfriend who was part of the reason I really got into cycling, and she made me do a gravel race with her and I cried. Like, it was so technical. It was called Grinduro, which is like a really technical style of, it's enduro stages, like mountain bike enduro, but on a gravel bike. And there was like technical routes, and I'd never ridden off road in my life before, so I cried. But I said that if I ended up on the podium, I would buy a gravel bike because the prizes were saddles. So I was like, well, I'll buy a bike for the saddle, and I came third. So I was like, I'm gonna have to buy a bike. So that's how I bought my first gravel bike. And then when I started riding lots in lockdown, I actually didn't really ride that much off road, but I nearly sold the bike because I was like, I've not got anyone to ride gravel with because we broke up. And I was like, I don't know anyone else who has a gravel bike, especially in London. It's only been the last couple of years where people in London have got gravel bikes. So having a gravel bike back in, what was it, 2020, no one else had a gravel bike to ride with me. So I nearly sold the bike, but I managed to find a friend to ride with me. And then, yeah, just from there, started doing some gravel races, realized it really suited me physiologically and that I really enjoyed racing gravel. And I always think it's funny because people describe me sometimes as like one of the OG gravel racers. But like, I only started riding a bike at 20. It's just that gravel only really hit Europe when I got into it.
I think before that we just called it cyclocross.
Yeah.
Or
So
road riding
true.
on dirt.
Yeah, we're just riding on dirt. I think it
Yeah.
only became a thing really in 2022, um, maybe 2021 a little bit. But yeah, so then I actually ended up after the pandemic, I started a job in finance and I worked in finance for just short of 6 months. I was trying to hit the 6 month like achievement and it got to like 5 months and I just wasn't getting any joy in the job. And I was working between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. minimum every single day. And my only cycling was my commute to and from work. So I would leave the house at 5:30 in the morning, cycle through Richmond Park to the office. So it was like a 20k ride to the office, 20k home at the end of the day. And I was like, I'm only looking forward to my commute, not the actual day. And I'm like kind of dreading Mondays. And every week I'd get sick because I was so tired and run down, and all I would do all weekend was ride my bike both days. And yeah, Courtney, who's my I was just about to say who's my wife now. She is. That's crazy. That's the first time I've like used that word in like a, a setting like this. Courtney, my wife, turned around to me and was like, basically, she didn't give me like an ultimatum, but she was kind of like, "You're so depressed that if you keep doing this job, I don't think we're going to be together any longer. Like, you kind of need to sort yourself out." Um, and I took the ultimatum and I was like, okay, fair play. I am really depressed. I probably should do something else. And yeah, I resigned from my job to join. I always say to join a like it was a domestic team, like sponsored but unpaid, like absolutely not paid anything. My bosses at the bank were just like what do you mean you're gonna quit this job to save
They're
this?
probably thinking, we're glad you're getting out of investment banking because this does not seem like a strong investment. I would not make this financial decision ever.
So literally, I remember one of my bosses sitting me down and being like, "Do you think you're ever going to make any money cycling?" And I was like, "I could make some money," but I also said, "It doesn't matter if I make a living. I just want to do something for fun for a bit, take the opportunity to give it a go." And I knew I could earn enough to survive off tutoring maths. So I studied maths at university and I always tutored maths from like the age of 18, like alongside studying. So I'd had years of experience tutoring maths and I knew I could earn a decent amount per hour. So I was like, well, it's okay. I don't need to work that many hours a week tutoring to be able to survive. So I'll just do that until I kind of give up on the cycling. And luckily I got better at cycling because at that time I wasn't very good. But I think I also felt like I had to get better because of the position I'd thrown myself in. Like I had to kind of justify the decision I made. And I feel like now, what we're 5 years later. I think I've justified it, but it's taken like 5 years to be like, yeah, it's fair, like fair to kind of quit that job. Um, yeah, but yeah, that's the story. And then I from that year racing for that team, I did a couple of UCI races. So that was the first year that the UCI Gravel World Series happened. And I did all right at those. I did the first ever Elite World Champ. So I've actually done all 4 World Championships, which I think is quite cool. And I'll do the 5th one this year in Australia. I think only me and Tiff Cromwell have done all of them. And I think she's retiring this year. So maybe if I keep going next year to World Champs, maybe I'll be the only one who's done all of them, which would be cool.
You really would be the OG, Maddy.
Yeah,
Yes.
I really would be the OG. But yeah, I raced World Championships, and after that, I was like, oh, do you know what? I love this. I want to try and give gravel more of a go. And I managed to find kind of a few sponsors. And from there, I've just built my sponsorship year on year and yeah, built the race calendar up and raced in some really, really cool places.
Yeah, I find you to be quite an inspiring figure in cycling, not just specific to gravel, because I think this won't necessarily relate to all ages, because unfortunately there is an age where you cannot probably realistically think that there might be a journey to being a paid professional athlete. And I'm certainly not saying that that's actually the ultimate goal for everyone, because everyone's goals are unique and important to their own. But I think you're quite an inspiring figure for people that come to cycling a little bit later, because there can be a little bit of a misconception that cycling's a bit like, tennis or football, where if you haven't been doing it from 6, you're never going to make it. Or if you haven't gone through the national program and been selected for national teams here, there, and wherever, that the job's up. You missed the boat, and I think it's really great that you stand there and you speak this story to inspire people. Hopefully not to your demise with more strong riders coming into the future, but I think your story is great because it really is. It is somebody that wasn't scared to take a big risk in life, and a lot of the time we spend a huge amount of focus and energy on our qualification, on our degree, on a job pathway. But you identified that that wasn't your calling at the time, and there was a new love in your life that was growing, and you chased it. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I don't know if it will ever be my calling, finance. Now that I've had so much freedom and pursued a passion, I think I'd really struggle to pursue something that wasn't a passion. So even if one day I'll have to retire from cycling, but when I eventually retire from cycling, I'm sure I'll open a cafe or something. I don't think I'll be running back to investment banking.
Well, at least you'll probably do your accounts well.
I'm not even very good at doing my accounts. I was thinking this the other day, I should use the fact that I was qualified to trade to be better at investing. I should probably be better with my personal finances, but it's not something that brings me joy.
Well, what did they say, Colby? Every plumber has a leaky tap.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Maddy, my understanding is you did some physiological testing at the service course in Girona with Frankie, our physiologist on staff at Team EF Coaching. Maybe we can dive into that a bit and what your experience was there.
Yeah, so we did some lactate testing. So what did we ramped up? How long? I can't even remember how long the ramps were. Was it a minute? No, longer. 4 minutes. It was 4-minute ramps.
Yeah, correct.
We did 4-minute ramps, and Frankie was measuring lactate every 4 minutes and then ramping it up basically until not necessarily failure, but until it really ramped up a bit.
Yeah, I think the protocol was we started at 60% of your estimated FTP. Not that we love to talk about FTP here, but that's what we calculated it off. And then we went up every 4 minutes, we went 10 watts, which does not sound dramatic, but there is a certain point that we start to see physiological changes and increase in your lactate. So I'll let you go from there and talk about your experience, because for us it was quite unique.
Yeah, so it took a while for there to be an increase, but then when there was an increase, it was there was a big increase quite fast, no? But it did take a while for there to be some increase, which I guess makes sense why I do I enjoy the really, really, really long stuff.
Indeed. And then at the end of the ramp test, we then put Maddy directly into a 1 minute max.
Which was horrible, because at that point you've done 4 minutes so many times at increasing powers, so there's literally nothing left.
No, there's not many matches left to burn at that point. And that's why it's interesting to actually see your glycolytic capacity. So we came into the test with a hypothesis that Maddy was one of, if not the best, ultra gravel rider in the world, in female cycling. And we knew that her LT1, which is lactate threshold 1, was going to be quite a long ways from where we started, which was exactly the case. In fact, Maddy's lactate, after a few steps, even went down, which showed that, her body was really processing and basically showing that she's an endurance freak. But our hypothesis was that her LT1 and LT2 would have a very small delta between the two. And then we also finally came to the secondary hypothesis that Maddy was not a very glycolytic rider, and that we were going to see a pretty low maximum lactate substrate. Now, the findings were correct for the first part, which was LT1 and LT2 had, I believe, a 15 or 20 watt difference between them, which is actually highly unusual for most riders. And it gave me some insight for future coaching. And for the listeners, I've been working with Maddy now since April.
Yeah.
And we're a few months into working together, which has been a lot of fun and a lot of learning for me, actually. It's quite an unusual coaching sphere to be in, helping somebody along with ultras. But we realized that the LT2 was way too close to LT1 for us to be able to come up with a pacing strategy that gives Maddy the ability to punch over climbs without potentially risking burning too many matches, for these sort of longer events where you actually really need to keep what is essentially your W prime battery as full as possible because the day goes very long. But what we didn't expect to see happen was when Maddy did her minute max at the end of the test, she rose from 4.8 mol of lactate, which is where we established her LT2 sat. And it kept going up. And I had sort of guessed that Maddy might be an 8 or a 9 as a maximum. But Maddy did a minute at 480 watts, which is much less than she can do for a minute, which is to be expected after a ramp test. But Maddy still did 480 watts for a minute. And Frankie and I were looking at each other like, that's like, she's going really hard. And then when we finally took the lactate reading, it came in at 13.8. And even Frankie went, that's a little bit fishy. So we pulled out a separate lactate pro reader just to actually corroborate the number. And this one was 13.9. So we realized that the reading was actually true and that Maddy is a very glycolytic rider as well as an endurance freak, which gave us some pretty exciting news that Maddy can work on her LT2 and her W prime a lot more and become one hell of a gun on the bike. Not that you already aren't, but we realized that you're nowhere near your ceiling, which is quite exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to try harder, basically, in shorter steps.
Well, I wouldn't say you need to train harder.
I'll let Colby take over on this point because he sort of roped this idea into me early on in my cycling career, is that as riders, we sort of have like an off the couch ability to do things. And I'll let Colby explain that more. But then the second part of it is that we tend to do a lot of what feels good and why that can be bad for us as athletes.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, that's true, right? Like we do have an off the couchness. Someone who's dreadfully out of shape, they can still go pull a rabbit out of the hat for a certain type of riding. For some people, that might be a long climb. For some people, it might be getting lost on the bike for 8 hours, right? And having cafe stops. But for some people, it might be 1 minute or 3 minutes flat out. And so teasing out what someone's kind of inherently or natively good at helps you understand the landscape of what they're capable of and how trainable they might be in other areas. And your lab tests or your lab results are really interesting, Maddy, because you sort of illustrated capacity to work on both ends of that spectrum. And I think a lot of coaches and a lot of athletes have the idea that there's sort of a teeter-totter effect with someone who's very glycolytic or has a lot of fast twitch capability or the ability to generate a large wave of lactate, and having a very, very well-trained aerobic system. And those two tend to do this in many athletes. But every once in a while, we find a unicorn. And these lab tests suggest that you are in the unicorn category because you've got both those abilities are at a very, very high level physiologically. And what that means from a practical standpoint is that you have the potential to be really good at a lot of different types of bike races. So when someone's really aerobically trained, but their glycolytic system is not so sharp, we describe this as someone who's got the characteristics of a diesel. They've got long event power, but they can't really sprint their way out of a wet paper bag, right? They've got no capacity for change in pace or limited capacity for change in pace or acceleration. And if they come to the line with a small group, let's say they're in a breakaway of 6 riders, one of my good buddies is fond of saying these types of riders will finish 12th in a sprint, in a 6-way sprint, right? They just get completely dumped. So that's one outcome. And then the other side of the spectrum would be someone who's classically characterized as more of a sprinter, more of a criterium rider. Maybe they specialize in short track or even short cross-country mountain bike races. And they've got a very good capacity for acceleration and change. And they can also tolerate they can generate and tolerate a large wave of lactate, which would come about from a very intense short effort. And typically we kind of have this teeter-totter, but when someone's got both those tools in their toolbox, then it enables them to potentially be a weapon in all kinds of different bike races, from 560-kilometer ultras down to shorter, more intense races, something more in the cross-country level potentially. So that's an exciting landscape to work with as an athlete and as a coach, because it sort of it means that we can explore a lot of avenues, and you can really put your mind to a target and say, I want to give this a shot. And ostensibly, or the data would suggest, the experience would suggest, that you don't have a lot of limits in terms of your natural boundaries, natural ceilings. Some people, they'll train and train and train the other side of the spectrum, and they can move the dial, but they just don't respond as well for a variety of different reasons.
So I see the challenge for our next coaching journey is it's sort of like a U shape right now. We actually have this crazy lactate generating capacity, and we have this, like, Maddy can just ride forever at a really hard pace, but where we sort of see everything else is sort of like in a U shape.
Mm-hmm.
So the next journey is going to be actually lifting that through the U to actually create less of a dip, or is that a parabola, right?
Yeah.
We want to have less of a acute parabolic curve, and we actually want to sort of bring that closer to those 2 points, which I think is a really exciting period for you in your athletic journey. But we've also noticed that since we have actually been working on the things that you don't like doing, which is short efforts, we've already seen a huge increase in capacity and ability. So would you like to share any of your feelings or sensations that you've had?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think sometimes, I don't know whether it's a little bit mental, because I think after doing the testing and Nathan saying, no, you actually are quite glycolytic, because I've always really put myself in the diesel engine bucket. Like, I feel like I've always defined myself as like a diesel engine. I love long rides. I've done all the races pretty much that I've done well at have been like long races. Like, the harder, the longer, the better. So I think I put myself in that bucket, and I've always thought I don't have a kick at all. And then Nathan was like, no, Manny, you actually do have this potential. And then I went out and did like a 2-minute effort, and I smashed my 2-minute PR. And I think part of that was just like mentally being like, no, I can push harder.
Mm-hmm.
So I think doing that, and then like I've noticed it with shorter efforts in the training sessions that Nathan's been setting me. I like keep pushing harder and actually like beating those numbers and being like, okay, maybe there was just like a wall that I wasn't pushing over. And I think there's also a level of, not that I'm a perfectionist, but I like to do things to the best of my ability always, and I don't like failing. And with training, I don't think I can remember many training sessions where I've like failed and I think that's because I'm never pushing to a point of failure. I'm always like making sure I do the power set for the time period set, but not pushing too much and then failing. And like with that session with the 2-minute efforts, Nathan was like, if you don't make it to 2 minutes sometimes because you've actually pushed too hard and you've overcooked it, that's fine. Like, that's the point of the effort, is to like actually fail sometimes and like see where your ceiling is. And I think that helped to be like, okay, it's not failure if I don't make it to 2 minutes. But up until now, I've always been like viewed sessions as kind of like green box that you have to tick, where like not making the full interval is failure.
So I think this is a perfect illustration of how data can help us and how data can hold us back, right? So the data that we got from this physiological testing that we did actually informed you that there is a capacity beyond what you're pushing on the bike right now, or that your diesel engine also has a turbo capacity to it. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of exciting. Like you said, it breaks down a wall. But then the dark side of data can sometimes be that we actually set our own ceiling. And, often we see, say, like a race that starts on a climb, where a group becomes selected and that group often stays away in gravel racing. I think there's 2 types of riders that get dropped in those scenarios. One is the rider that simply doesn't have the capacity to do that, whether that's, VO2 capacity, whether it's watts per kilo, whatever the parameter is that's holding them back. Some people just don't have that, and that's fine. I've been that person many times. Sometimes I'm not, sometimes I am, and that's just how it goes. But then I think there's also the type of rider that thinks that everybody is always completely under control within an effort, and that they think if I'm not exactly at this sort of number that I know I can do for, a duration or period of time, those riders must also be at exactly that number, but they're just better than me. But this is one of those interesting moments that data can hold us back because, to use your, historical racing as another example, I've seen races where you were dropped on a climb early on, and there might be a group of 6 in front. And then after a 160-kilometer race, you finish a minute 20 behind them in 7th, but you rode the entire race as a time trial.
Yeah.
And I've tried to explain, before we were working together, like, Maddy, it's really worth going beyond your limit, because sometimes in bike racing, we just have to go beyond our limit to make it with that group, because then for the rest of the race, you're not doing a time trial. You're actually able to sit on the wheels and recover and go with the pace and the oscillation of pace that group has, as opposed to pure force. And an interesting thing that you kind of always came back to me with was, I'm scared to blow up so I can't potentially win. But then the other side of that coin is that if you're not in that group, 99% of the time you're not going to be able to win, because you're already out of the situation that you'll be fresh enough to actually perform a useful final, which is to, attack or to win a sprint. So it's been really interesting to actually see how the data from this test has sort of broken down that wall, and to see how we're actually looking at failure in training actually as a good thing and as a goal, as opposed to a weakness. And, I think that that's something that I like to, when I speak with other coaches or people within the coaching sphere, is that, there are some riders, some character types of riders that are very much like failure or success when it comes to anything that they do. And it's very important to change the language to create more of a gray area, right? Things aren't black and white in life. There's no good and bad. There's a lot of things all in between. And there's also positives when things go wrong. And there's also negative things when things go right in a race. Like, you can always do something better. So it's been fun actually watching you sort of like break through that wall and evolve. And I think it's quite an exciting time that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like a natural risk aversity that I have that I need to try and work on for bike racing, because sometimes you don't need to be you don't need to race a bike race conservatively, or you shouldn't necessarily. It also depends on the race and depends on the situation. But I think I'm always like, oh, I'd prefer to like not risk blowing up and then know I'm definitely going to finish, because I also have a thing about not wanting to ever DNF a race, which I know not everyone has, but I think some riders do. But like, I view like not finishing a race as like a big failure. So I would always prefer to like hold back and like not push myself over a limit. Say, for example, in a moment where like the group's separating on a climb, because I don't want to risk not finishing the race.
So, several thoughts going through my head, but a question for you, Maddy. Do you feel like your training and finance is influencing your perspective on bike racing? Like, are you basically diversifying your stocks and staying away from crypto? Is that what's happening?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I am just risk averse as a person. I think that's just like how I've kind of, I say that and then I quit the finance job, which is like high risk.
And you race 560-kilometer endurance races. Like, I mean, there are many people right now who are probably going, risk averse? There's nothing risk averse about riding your bike through the forest for 560K. Depends on your perspective, right?
I guess I with that I was pretty confident I could ride that distance. But then, to be fair, I'd never ridden that many hours before, and I'd never ridden over a whole night. I didn't know if I'd get sleepy.
Right. Or, run into the side of a zebra or a tiger or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there's lots of risk inherent in bike racing. This is a great conversation. It reminds me of myself as a younger rider. I reinvented myself as a rider multiple times during my career. And one of the gifts that whole lesson gave me, going from the diesel time trial side to become a points racer on the track, was understanding that a lot of my own preconceived notions about what I was good at or what I preferred were not only false, but they were also really entangled. So the analogy I give to my clients sometimes when they come in for a bike fit is, especially when I see someone who's very quad dominant, normally we would associate quad dominance with someone who's better at the squat pattern, right? A little more knee flexion and extension. And someone who's more hip dominant or posterior chain dominant would probably be better at deadlifts, which is more oriented around the glute muscles hinging the body, the torso over the legs. And so I'll just ask people, you've got two choices in the gym. You could go to the squat station or the deadlift station. And to amp up my thought experiment, I'll ask them to imagine someone they find attractive kind of smiling at them and watching what they're going to do, right? So now they want to put on their best face forward, so to speak. And people get the point right away. And the point is kind of, there's a few points that go into that. One is we sort of tease out whether someone's quad dominant or glute dominant just based off their preferences, because almost everyone prefers to do what they're good at, right? I mean, that's why you do sport, is to see some success to some degree. Then over a long enough arc, you get to the point perhaps that I did, where I realized that I still really sucked at a lot of aspects of cycling, and I intentionally put myself in those positions without ego and just to see what would happen, like knowing that I was going to crash and burn, so to speak. And there was a lot of growth and learning in that for me too. The earlier phase of that for me, and I'm just talking about my own process, maybe this will ignite some ideas in your mind, was kind of intentionally throwing myself head first into the efforts that I sucked at. And that's where I transitioned from diesel to more of a points racer. And it sounds like that's exactly where you're at right now, is like, well, I'm just going to go do some 2-minute efforts and just fillet myself for the first time ever and not be afraid of, crashing and burning, so to speak, like not finishing an effort or flaming out, after a minute and a half. And there's so much gold in those experiences and throwing yourself into those and just being cavalier about it, because we learn about the limits, the ceilings that we thought were there. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. And that's a growth edge, right? And then it just gives us depth. It gives us belief in ourselves. And I think that so often as coaches and athletes, we assume that the training we're doing on the bike, the purpose of it is physiological gain, is to get stronger. Well, that's true, or that's not untrue, but that's a very superficial way to look at it. I think a big part of training is also about learning what you're capable of, right? It's about exploring your own psychological landscape. So you go do a bunch of 2-minute efforts and you fail and fail and fail, so to speak, over and over again, because you don't meet a power target or you blow up at a minute 42. But you learn about yourself and you learn how to pace those efforts, and you learn what that experience feels like in your body, what your lungs feel like, what your legs feel like, what happens to your head, how small the path of vision gets, right? How your handling maybe falls apart, right? Because you become less capable of driving the bike or understanding where you are in space. Like, we can go that deep sometimes. And all that is just gold that informs your ability during races to make decisions. And again, like, to wear out the analogy, like access more tools from the toolbox. Then you become a rider with more depth. That wasn't a question. That was just a bunch of words, but.
So, Maddy, what's the next phase for you? I think this year's been an amazing season of self-discovery about how good you are at ultras. I think the hard thing with the current calendar of gravel racing is that there's actually not so many ultras. For example, Tracker has ditched their endurance event for next year. Unbound XL, obviously that's one I'm sure that you're going to want to try to go win. Second is awfully close to first, so it's natural there. Iceland, that's an amazing experience. But there's not so many of these sort of high-profile ultras. So is your calendar within your heart at the moment feeling like it's going to look a little bit different for next season?
Yeah, I think, well, definitely I do want to go back to Unbound because coming second in a race that you feel like you could win is like enough to make you want to go back. And I also think that the reason that I didn't do, well, I made so many errors in that race. I want to go back and like not make the errors as well. Um, but yeah, I'm definitely like looking at doing some different stuff as well, just because, as you said, there's not that much. There's a lot of really long ultras, and I don't have the appetite to put myself into sleep deprivation at this point in my life. Like maybe I'll change my mind in a few years and think, oh, something like the Tour Divide sounds really fun. But I think right now I don't want to try and test the limits of how little I can sleep. And those are the ultras that have like real eyes on them as well. So yeah, I'm keen to work on the upper end stuff and see whether I can like improve the turbo engine side of stuff as well. For the rest of this season, I've only got races. I think the longest race I'm doing is like 120k now, which is crazy. So our national champs is only 85 kilometers, which is very different from the races I've done so far this year. But it'll be really interesting to give that a proper go after having like worked on different stuff and like changed my training up, because like we've really changed my training up since the end of April. So it'll be interesting to see, and also with like the kind of change in mindset, whether I can go into that with more confidence that I can race an 85-kilometer race. Like the race doesn't need to be over 400k for me to be able to like properly race it. And then I've also got UCI race and then World Champs as well, which I'm really keen to give a proper go because it looks like a really cool course.
So, Maddy, here's a thought experiment for you, and I think this can be a fun exercise. If you were a coach, let's put this little coach hat on for the moment, and you were speaking to this amazing athlete, Maddy Nutt, after the season that she's already had so far, and she was approaching the next races, where this one that's 85k, World Champs is 120. What advice would you give Maddy?
That's a really hard question. Um, I think it would mostly be on the mental side of it. Like, I think my advice would all be mental about like fully committing. Like, and I actually think like a really practical piece of advice would be to not have the power number on the screen. Like I know that's quite a simple thing to say, but I have my power and my heart rate on my screen, and I don't think that's necessarily beneficial for every race. Like I would say for tracker, it was really helpful because then on the longer climbs, I was like really able to pace my effort and I knew what kind of power I could, like it's like knowing roughly, I knew roughly before doing the lactate testing, I had a rough idea of where I felt like my LT1 was. So I knew I could sit below that comfortably. But for an 85 kilometer to race, I don't think looking at my power is actually beneficial for me. And almost I think that seeing the number is sometimes where I limit myself, because I'll look down and as you said, like the people in races who like be on a climb, they'll look down and be like, I don't think I can do this for another 5 minutes. And I've raced without the power number on my screen before and I've got power records. So I actually think I think it was Gravel Burn last year. I turned it off for the first stage and I got a 10-minute power record on the first climb. So I do think that would be my main piece of advice, would be to like take off the data from the screen, focus on the map slash I don't even there might be, it's quite a simple course because it's like 3 loops, so maybe there's just arrows. Maybe just focus on the race and just like push, see where your limit is basically. Would be my advice.
That's great. I love it. This is what I
can
call
follow it. I can take the power off the screen. It's not that hard.
Yeah, it's not. I call this the Han Solo effect, right? Like we've all seen Empire Strikes Back, and there's a scene where he gets tortured, and they've got him on this device, and they're like leaning him forward, and there's all these spacey looking electrical bits, and it's like sparking and whatever. And before he even touches the spacey bits, whatever they are, the electrodes, he's kind of like flinching and like, oh, ah. And then, they cut to another room and you hear him getting tortured. But I think people do this with their power meter. This is the Han Solo effect, where they see a number, and, or as Nathan would say, you don't go to hospital before you're sick. Like you start to freak out about the number. Maybe you're capable of whatever, 20, 30, 50 watts more that day because you've never done it before. That's what races are for sometimes. As you said, you weren't watching and you set a 10-minute PR. So there are times when we can see a number and all of a sudden our RPE can become elevated because we have a belief system that we're not capable of a certain amount of power for a certain duration. And the danger in that, there's multiple levels of problem with that. One is that it could forsake a PR on a given day. You might be having an exceptional day. But also, I think the mistake people make is they see a snapshot of a single number, 312 watts or whatever it is, or 412 watts, and they instantly conclude, I'm doing 412 watts right now. But this is like looking at a single frame of the entire Empire Strikes Back movie, And if you saw the right frame, like, you might get a really good idea of what's going on in the film, like Luke fighting Darth with a lightsaber. You'd be like, okay, that's probably the bad guy, that's the good guy. But if you see Chewie playing space chess, you're just lost. Like, you have no idea what the hell's happening, right? So snapshots are dangerous, and that's what you're going to get when you're looking at your power meter on a bumpy gravel climb, like negotiating routes, and there's wheels around you, and people are dropping water bottles, and you're going super hard. You look down at your power meter, you get one shot to see a number. So, yeah, I think it's a great idea.
I actually heard a great expression the other day on Boss Baby, the movie, which is really embarrassing. But sometimes the most ridiculous sources of inspiration can be the best. And the quote was, whether you think you can or you can't, you're correct.
You're probably right. Yes. Yes.
That's quite a good quote, to be fair.
And I think that for the wrong type of rider, which is the risk-averse or highly analytical rider, seeing that snapshot can tend to lead you to believe that you can't, which means that you're correct. And if you believe that you can't, there will be a chemical cascade going from your brain to every ending in your body to say that that was too much and you have to back it off. So I think that's beautiful advice to yourself, Maddy. And I think this is actually a thought experiment that a lot of athletes should ask themselves. It's actually a very high level of cognition, which is like self-reflection, or even like self-identification, to say, where am I in this space and time, and what would be my challenge, and how do I overcome that? The coach is not always there to tell you this. The coach can be there to also inspire you to look inward, to ask yourself the question. So I think that's wonderful. I think something else is really badass about you, Maddy, and I know that this is pretty much just like a cheerleader podcast about Maddy Nutt. So sorry if anyone out there thinks that we're going over the top, but something else that I think is really quite inspiring about you is your YouTube channel. You have how many subscribers now?
I think 20,000.
20,000. It's not an insignificant number. Maddy does videos which are completely honest, and if you go from the start to where she is now, it's pretty much like if you plugged it into AI, it would be like a story of how somebody found out through doing lots of things well and poorly to become a better athlete over time in a very honest way. So I think where you're quite an inspirational figure, I think, in cycling is that you're very honest in how your experiences have gone, but it's never in like a self-flatulating, manner. It's always just very honest. So I think you like to share your experience so that people can, one, either be inspired to find this really fun, or on the other side of it is understand that, just because your Instagram has you up on podiums and smiling and having coffee all the time, there's also some really hard moments and some very honest moments. So I would love to ask you, Maddy, if there were any athlete, but I think this might sway a little bit more towards female athletes, because I think the barrier to getting into cycling is still harder for women than it is for men. I think there's less role models. I think there's less N+1 for examples of how people do it. What would be your sort of cliff notes on what you would encourage people to do if they were to look into cycling?
I think number one would be finding a community. I think that's really what got me started, is like finding a community of people to ride with and like building that community. So finding people that were up for like big adventures, and it also helps with one of the biggest like barriers I found when I first started cycling was like the mechanic side of things, which might sound quite simple, but that really put me off riding, that there was like an element of you have to look after the bike, and finding other people who are more passionate about that and able to help you, or finding a really good bike shop that is able to help you, can make a really big difference there, because that really put me off early on, that I really wasn't capable of maintaining a bike and looking after it. And it's a bit scary to kind of learn. It's very overwhelming when you first start cycling. There's so much to
Yeah.
learn, like what equipment you need, yeah, how to maintain the bike, like so many things can. I remember once I was riding and I suddenly was like, why can't I shift gears? And I didn't realize my cable had snapped in my shifter, because I didn't even necessarily know how gears worked and that there was a cable in the shifter. um Things like that. And I think community really helps with that, because then you've got people to ask questions to. um so community is the main thing. And then just like cycling for fun, because I think so many people who get into cycling in a way that's competitive, they they lose the fun at some aspect, and then it becomes unsustainable. And I've seen this happen with friends with ex-teammates, where they take it too seriously all the time, and then by losing any element of fun, you lose the passion and the reason you started doing it in the first place. And I think that's what's kept me going, despite, especially that first year when I wasn't very good. Like the reason why I kind of kept going and kept pushing and kept getting better was because I have a genuine love for it, and I always kept it fun. So always keeping it fun in some aspect. Like it can't be fun every single time you ride your bike, because if you're training especially, you're going to do hard sessions. But having like an adventure ride every so often, putting in a bike packing trip with a friend every so often, just keeping an element of like variety and fun, riding different routes, not always riding the same route, um checking out new cafes. That's the kind of thing I always do to keep it really fun.
Mhm.
um but yeah, I think cycling is a really high barrier to entry because of the equipment side of things. But you don't need to buy a really expensive fancy bike to start cycling. The first bike I got was £200 secondhand from a friend. And I had a pair of ridiculous orange cycling shoes that were like triathlon shoes and an orange £20 helmet. Like you can just get the basic stuff and borrow stuff from people to get started. And then as you develop an interest, you can always upgrade your equipment. But I think there's so much on social media of people with really nice kit, really nice bikes, just making it almost just seem like it's unachievable to get going. Whereas it actually isn't that hard to find a really cheap secondhand bike and start cycling.
I love that. I began racing on a $1,500 aluminium Trek with 105, and I still remember the faces of all the guys that were in the national program when I was beating them all on this like clunker bike, and they sort of looked down at me. But for me, I just loved racing and I loved trying to win. And I actually
Yeah.
think that especially for parents out there, I don't think the best gift you can give your kid is the top level bike. I think keeping people hungry and just keeping them honest and
Mhm.
wanting to race is actually more important than the equipment.
Yeah, definitely.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, Maddie, it's been wonderful learning a little bit more about you. But I'll just ask one last question. And obviously, there's a little bit of bias from our side, but it's always interesting to hear this from an active athlete. How important do you think it is to have a coach?
Oh, good question. Depends where you are on your cycling journey. I think very early on, I think there's a lot you can do yourself before needing a coach, but you reach a certain point And I reached this in that era. I would say, like, in that era in COVID, when I was just loving riding my bike and riding like 8 hours a day, I think I reached a point where I needed someone external to actually, like, one, be accountability, but not accountability to ride, accountability to not ride too much more than anything, but also just like someone external to guide me and the training, where like I didn't have the like knowledge and resources beyond a certain point. I think you can, especially like with online resources now, you can like learn a basic training plan, put together a basic training plan, but I think you'll reach a point where you plateau, and that's the point where working with a coach is really beneficial, because you can push and like work on your weaknesses and really kind of customize that training, because actually generic training, it's not going to work for everyone. Like, it improves you to a certain point, but I think there's always going to be a limiter on something that's generic and not customized for the individual. And then the accountability point, I think, is something that you can only get with working with a coach. So like certain personality types could maybe work with a generic online training plan or just doing their own riding. But I think there are some personalities who, either because they need the motivation like extrinsically to train, or because they need someone extrinsic to say stop overtraining. So sometimes it's like, it's both sides of, I've seen people on both sides of that, like either needing a coach to be like, come on, you've got this, like you've got this event in 8 weeks time, like we're gonna like do these training and then you're gonna feel great toward like when you do that race. But also the people who naturally overtrain and therefore they're not reaching their potential because they're being silly and just like acting like, I definitely used to overtrain when I was not using a training plan, just because I was like, well, I love riding my bike, so I'm just gonna ride my bike every single day all day. But that's not how you get fast on a bike. So yeah, if you want to get fast on a bike and you're hitting a certain point in terms of your plateauing, or you could still be improving, but you're improving and you think you've got potential to improve even more, that's when I'd say working with a coach is important. I probably waited a bit too long to start working with a coach, because I was already racing when I started working with a coach.
Well, I don't think there's any point that's ever too late. I think it's always just the right moment when people start a relationship in coaching with the sport that they love. So, Maddy, huge thank you for today. Appreciate your time. I hope your hangover from your wedding eventually subsides and we can get back to meaningful training. But as always, life is about balance. And just because you eat one meal at McDonald's doesn't make you unhealthy. And just because you eat one salad does not make you healthy. So life is about balance, and cycling should always be in right relationship to life. And there's not much more fun than your own wedding. So
I could have timed it better, you know. I could have put it in off season, but I really wanted a summery weather wedding, and it was beautiful. So no regrets.
No regrets, and we work with what we've got. So, Maddy, thank you as always. It's a pleasure to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into the Cycling Performance Podcast. This podcast is produced by myself, Nathan Haas, and Colby Pearce, in association with EF Education and Team EF Coaching, a world leader in cycling coaching for all ages, abilities, and goals. Our world-class team of coaches have won over 100 national titles across all disciplines of cycling, competed in 47 Grand Tours with victories in all 3 and 6 Olympic Games. So it's our goal to distill our experiences to bring you the most cutting-edge approach to cycling to achieve your goals, dreams, and aspirations in our beautiful sport. If you'd like to learn more about Team EF Coaching, find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, or at our website, teamefcoaching.com. We would like to thank Peridur ap Gwyneth from Pendulum for the energetic theme music, and to Ross Hallard, our wonderful editor. Ride in flow, space monkeys!